Welcome to another edition of Around the Table with Stacy Smith as we take a look at investing and the economy. It's difficult not to raise your eyebrows over what is happening with the economy. It has been 40 years since the core inflation rate has been this high. It has been more than 14 years since the Fed funds rate has been this high, and it's heading higher. And it's been 20 years since mortgage rates have been this high. And the average 401k lost 20% of its value by the end of the second quarter. And it will probably be more than that when the numbers are tallied for the third quarter. And one more thing, a lot of talk about the U.S. and the world is facing a recession next year. So we have a lot of things to talk about with my panel of experts and financial advisors, and I'm going to introduce them to you right now. As we go around the table, we find a name familiar to a lot of Pittsburghers, and that is Bob Fragasso. Bob has been in the investing business and advisory business for 50 years and is chairman and chief executive officer of Fragasso Financial Advisors. Across the table, we find Kim Forrest. Kim is the chief investment officer and the founder of Boca Capital Partners. Kim has a dual background in both finance and also in software engineering, and you may have seen her in many appearances on CNBC, Fox Business, and Bloomberg. Also with a seat at the table is Frank Rossetti. Frank has been advising clients for 50 years. Frank helped to establish Harvest Financial, where he's the executive chairman. And Carrie Coghill is also with us. Carrie is the president and CEO of Coghill Investment Strategies, which is headquartered here in Pittsburgh. She is recognized as one of the nation's leading voices on financial advising. So I just want to say thank you all for coming and joining us once again. And Carrie, I'd like to start with you if I can. And let's do this. There's troubling economic news out there. These are troubling times, and there's talk of a recession, and that talk becomes even more unnerving now. So if there is a recession, what will it mean to people and their investments?
Well, it's a great question, because what does it really mean? It's funny, over the weekend, my husband said to me, I don't get it. Like, all this talk of a recession, like, if it happens, then what? Like, we're expecting this, big something to happen. And the reality is that, it got me really thinking, like, it's just a label, and it's a label about something that's already occurred, because we don't know if we're in a recession until we're actually in it, and sometimes even over it. So, being in a recession, I think it's just now with, like everything else, with the media and social media, and, we're building this up to be some like big cataclysmic event. And the reality is that we have to stay the course. We have to look at what's going on with the economic data. As far as individuals are concerned, going into a recession, if we are going into a recession, what really matters is your cash flow. Do you have enough cash to be able to get you through? The biggest worry, I think, individually would be, how secure is my job? Because during recessions, we tend to see layoffs. As far as investment portfolios, every single time we've had a recession and the market's gone down, it's always recovered. So staying the course, which is what I know we always say that, but there's a reason for it. We'll see what happens if we actually have a recession. And probably the bigger question is, how deep of a recession would we have? It's kind of hard to think it's going to be so deep when employment is so strong.
This is why we're having difficulty even judging if we're having a recession. Yes, the GDP went down 2 quarters in a row, but unemployment is at as good a numbers as we've seen in decades. And even though it's starting to soften a little bit, we're a long way from having an employment problem. We still have far more jobs than we have people to take them. We have a skills recession. We don't really have a job recession. So it's a very interesting time, because things aren't really very bad, other than the inflation side.
I'm driven completely out of my mind crazy by people in this industry forecasting things like, we're going to have a recession in 6 months. Okay, I get it. Like, we all have to make forecasts, but I think this is completely out of bounds. Plus, and I'll really go out on a limb here, I don't think we're ever going to have our classic business cycle recessions anymore unless it is started by a crisis. And why is that? I'm the tech girl, technology. So here's the two halves that have to work together for any company. They have to know what's in their warehouse or what kind of products they have to sell and how much of that, right? And then they have to have demand. Well, now, unlike in the bad old days, I don't know, maybe 12 years ago, we couldn't figure out what demand was going to be in 6 months. And we didn't really know what was in our warehouses before the year 2000 when we completely revamped accounting systems. So now that we have these two pieces of the puzzle, I think most companies are well positioned to understand what their supply and demand is for their products. So the fact that everybody's out there trying to look really smart and saying in 6 months we're going to have a recession, I would completely overlook what those people are saying right now.
But all recessions are not created equally. This is a recession, and we've entered it in the classic definition of a business slowdown. There's nothing, as Carrie said, and my other fellow panelists have said, nothing cataclysmic here. This is not a market crash of real estate where homes are being foreclosed and all sorts of horrible economic things are happening. This is a slowdown in business that has been orchestrated by a rise in interest rates by the Federal Reserve to cool inflation. And we're moving in that direction. So this is just steady as you go.
Well, that's all well and good, but there are those who say that the inflation, the Fed waited too long to act, and now it's going to have to continue to raise these rates, and that might start some of these problems with people and their mortgages and everything else, couldn't it, or not?
They did, in my opinion, the Federal Reserve did wait too long to act. It should have acted incrementally earlier, but now it is raising interest rates, but it still is not tipping. It's not raising interest rates. Even the forthcoming rate increases will not tip us over into something that's going to be a drastic business slowdown. It'll just slow business down.
Yeah.
Well, the real problem with people that they're having now is the prices of things they consume. And I pose to the panelists that the Fed cannot do a darn thing about the price of gasoline and the price of food, because those are not assets. The Fed can absolutely affect the price of assets, and that includes stocks and bonds because they control an interest rate. But for the most part, they cannot directly impact those prices. So the things that are most troubling to us, the Fed can raise all day, but they're not going to impact us, at least not in the short term, like a lot of people think they can.
And to add to what Kim's saying, you've got the Fed trying to reduce demand, which is what they're trying to do. Excuse me, they're failing because everybody who can work is, and so the demand for products are there, and the low end of the employment spectrum is starting to be squeezed a little bit because they've used up the money they got because of COVID, and they're going to have to start pulling back. But that's not a big part of the demand equation in this country. The high end just motoring along like nothing's going on, and typically does. I've been doing this for 50 years, and I've not seen my high end clients ever slow down. They worry a lot, but they don't slow down.
Right. And Frank, you're exactly right. We're starting to see credit card use increase now because we have seen some of this stimulus savings run low. I think that the inflation factor, and to Kim's point, that's why inflation is reported with an overall number and then a core number taking out food and energy. But as we head into next year and we look at the comps in terms of year over year numbers, I think we're going to start to see those numbers come down, which will be a relief to the interest rate market and the outlook for inflation.
All right, we are going to have to take a break and then we'll come back in just a moment and when we continue with Around the Table with Stacy Smith.